Hey folks, welcome to the DarkHorse Podcast live stream Q&A cat infestation. We are going to attempt to address your questions with answers that hopefully you will find suitable. If they are not suitable, I don't know what we can do about it, but perhaps we'll set up a process.
A process.
Yeah, a process.
Yes. Yeah. All right. So we will start with a few questions from episode 50. And then we're going to pull one that was sent in from the Discord server and then begin with questions at the highest monetary level from last hour. And then finally answer questions from this hour that come in the order in which they come in. Although we, as always, reserve the right to pick and choose since we never get through all of them. Question from last time. Is there an ESS, that is an evolutionarily stable strategy, likely to evolve over time, as in decades, after a sufficient number of oscillations of power between right and left that will eventually result in policies that are not polar?
Yes. Problem being, there is nothing that guarantees you don't go extinct before you get there. So the tendency will be to go in that direction. The danger is that we won't make it. And the solution, of course, involves us consciously thinking about our desire not to go extinct and blueprinting a prototype that might replace the system. So anyway, I think there's a lot to be said about what we might do to stop that dangerous oscillation, the stinginess of the right, the utopianism of the left, and the hazard that they repeatedly place us in. So the way to fast forward the process is to talk about the hazard and what might get us out of it.
Yeah, and I mean, the ESS itself is going to be dynamic, just like, it will itself include oscillations. It has to. There's not going to be a set point. It can't be static.
Well, it can be a little bit like the temperature of one's body, where it is maintained within relatively tight tolerances. In other words,
I don't think it can be. I think it's more like, say, Lotka-Volterra dynamics between predator and prey.
That's the problem, is that dynamic. And the question is, can you build something that recognizes that dynamic, in this case, places you in danger, something that serves the function of basically homeostasis and does the job that oscillation does.
Can you make the body politic act like an individual organism?
Right.
And I'm surprised to hear you say that you think one can.
I don't think we have a choice. I really
don't.
But
I mean, not having a choice and it being possible are not just because you don't think we have a choice doesn't mean that it's possible.
Well, clearly you can at some scales. And the question is, can we scale it up so that the job is done? But clearly the hazard of oscillating back and forth is so great that the long-term well-being of the body politic depends on us taming that dynamic. So I do think there's a way there.
Maybe a domestication process rather than imagining that a group can act like an individual.
Well, I think we are beginning to have the conversation that recognizes that the tension between right and left is a navigation mechanism. That I think for the first time, I believe we know where we want to go, right? And both
we humans.
No, we the West.
Okay.
I believe we know what the end state looks like and that it's already been spelled out. And what we differ over is how close we are, how quickly we could go further in that direction. But, a society in which the tools to compete are available without bias, and in which one's misfortune is hedged out by a protective mechanism, and therefore people are liberated to try to bring benefit to humanity. That is the liberal West. Right? The fact that the liberal West has never gotten there, that there have always been populations that have been excluded from access to the market and all, means that there's a lot of work to do, but it doesn't mean that there's anything we need to learn about where we're headed. So I would say it's a little bit like the discovery that a sphere minimizes surface to volume ratio, right? You could have a sphere and you could say, well, what's better than a sphere? Well, nothing's better than a sphere. And then we can look at all the things that look spherical and we can say, how close really are they?
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, I think we know what works. We are in danger of taking it apart and having to rebuild it because of some utopian nonsense about some equitable thing that would be better than the thing that the West aspires to. But if we can survive the allergic reaction that people are having to the goal of the liberal West and figure out how to measure where we actually are and how to keep going in this direction, which we've been successfully doing for hundreds of years, it seems to me that we can do that. And the recognition that a system in which the right thinks we want to do X and the left thinks we want to do Y is actually a hazard, and that therefore the left and right should be interested in taming the dynamic so that they can each play their roles, but with respect to getting to a common goal is clearly the right answer.
All right. 44 states have science ed standards based on the next-gen sci standards. These standards require a shift in instruction and learning that might surprise you. Would you be opposed to doing a special series with separate episodes discussing each high school science standard? So I had, this came in last time and I looked at it. I forgot to pull it up again for this hour. And it is a little surprising what it is they're proposing. I think it's unlikely that our time is going to end up being spent going through a new set of standards. In general, I don't want to spend time on the particulars of the moment on any number of topics, because looking for the patterns that are larger are just, for a number of reasons, just what are more interesting to me. But I did look at these. I don't know if you've heard of them at all. And I was pleasantly surprised to see that some of them, the new science standards do seem to be about inquiry and actual science, as opposed to wokeness and shutting down questioning.
We'll see if they survive.
Yeah. Has Donnie paved the way for a flat Earth president? Is it feasible to flatten the Earth to meet demands?
Yeah, I don't even know what to do with that. Is it Donnie? Is it the dynamic that left the door open to Trump? I mean, I just don't understand why we're having this conversation as if he emerged out of nowhere and forced his way into the system.
What conversation do you think we're having that you don't understand?
A partisan one. The system has cancer or rabies or something, and I think we're still having an argument about the left half of the raccoon is less rabid, and therefore we have to support the left half of the raccoon rather than, oh my God, the raccoon has rabies, we're going to have to get rid of it and replace it with a raccoon that doesn't.
Okay,
not that
good.
We need raccoons, but I mean, we do.
Oh, we need raccoons.
We like raccoons. But,
yes.
All right. I've gotten tangled in
the raccoonness. No, that was good. I
think
think that helped you emerge from whatever funk you were in there briefly. That's good. I'll just get you on the topic of raccoons, or perhaps hedgehogs.
Oh, no. Not again.
No?
No.
Enough. Too many hedgehogs for 1 week.
Oh, my. Too much hedgehog for one lifetime.
Wow. Really?
Yeah. No, I would like to see hedgehogs. That's why this comes up.
Yes. Every time you speak with Douglas, for instance.
Yes. For example.
Are biological parents replaceable with surrogate or foster parents? If so, what do adopted children lose that only a biological lineage can provide?
Go.
Lots to say here. A family that has entirely adopted children is likely to have very few problems that a family with entirely genetic children might have. That the genetic lineage part of the relationship between parent and offspring is not largely something that looms large in daily life, I think. It is difficult, and I speak from experience in my own natal family and from hearing many other stories like it, when there are both genetic and adopted children in the home, that even when everyone is trying their absolute best, that there is conflict that erupts almost always. So I don't know what more you want to say about that. There's
Well,
obviously
I
a
would
lot
just
more.
say there's no bar to an adoptive parent being an excellent parent. There are things that make it less likely, mixed brood being one of them. We know that from lots of research that says such households are much more prone to all the things that go wrong. But the problem is we are seeing the collapse of parenting all over the place because in large measure our circumstances are too novel, and parents have antagonists that are trying to persuade kids of things that aren't true for their own economic reasons. And so anyway, there are so many things going wrong that focusing on what might be a small difference in the likeliness of an adoptive parent being an excellent parent, I think is just wrongheaded. We're seeing a failure of parenting all over the place. And really the point is what goes into excellent parenting, and how can we bootstrap a return to a culture in which parenting is basically functional, and that will bring adoptive parents along just as much as anyone else.
Mm-hmm. All right, final question from episode 50. Would you fly 7 hours to see elderly relatives for holidays, then stay with family in a hotel for 2 days? Is this unsafe given the pandemic? Note that the destination state requires a test or 14-day quarantine. So I included this not because I think we can answer it, because I think you need to know more about everyone's risk tolerance and the particularities of how careful people are being and all of this. But I wanted to just say this out loud because I suspect that this is something that a lot of people are wrestling with right now as the holidays approach. How is it that after 2/3 of a year of almost of some combination of lockdowns and just complete disorder at almost every level of life, how valuable are the shared memories that you would create around holidays together, which is so often a time that families see each other who don't otherwise have time to see each other. What is a break, for people who have an annual tradition, for whom that part of the annual tradition has actually not yet been disrupted? What might disrupting regular traditions that occur at that level of cyclicity do to further cause disorder? And I don't know, but I think it's potentially big. I think that there's been so much disruption this year, but there's this tether on the holiday season that can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. For some people it's Thanksgiving, for some people it's Christmas, for some it's Hanukkah isn't a real holiday, but it's
it's a minor holiday.
I know. I didn't mean not real, but for most people, there is some holiday at the end of the year that feels like the thing that they experience, that they return home for, the solstice, and giving up on all of that may create even greater sort of mental health disruption than we've yet seen. That said, people often complain about the family time around holidays, and missing it might actually reveal that it wasn't as bad as you thought. So there's a lot going on here, and I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I think it could be very hazardous in the sense of the annual check-in that people typically experience may have a calibration function that we don't.
Missing it could be hazardous, is what you mean.
Absolutely. Obviously, there's a huge danger of, a not a super spreader event, but a super spreader moment where people are gathering and suddenly versions of the virus are spreading around, which could be hazardous in its own right. One thing I would say that I think we have been discovering of late is, and this is actually a perfect model for what we were talking about before, about the oscillation between left and right. At the moment, we have two narratives about virus and carefulness surrounding it, both of which are wrong. And the little bit of travel that we have just done and the gathering with people where we have seen very few outside of our immediate circle for 2/3 of a year has revealed that there's a problem. Also, the change in season. All of these things have revealed that there is a problem with the fact that we have not reached agreement on what we are trying to accomplish, and therefore how to collectively make good decisions. In other words, there should be some discussion before you gather with people about how you're going to minimize the chances that if one of the people at the gathering has COVID, that it will not spread to others. In other words, is there an opportunity to meet outside? What is the code of conduct with respect to masks? Does the fact that I'm not wearing a mask while we are meeting outside mean that I am against masks? No. So, basically it would be great if a socially distant group outside didn't wear masks because they're unnecessary, put them on without anybody having to remind anybody as you go indoors, that you spend as little time as possible in very enclosed spaces. You prefer rooms that are larger. You prefer windows that are open. You prefer fans that are on.
Yeah. It's really tough to do for most of the country, though, in November and December.
Right. So what that means is that all of these things have changed. And so what we've discovered is that we had a really good pattern that we were all in on, and it just became
the four of us and our family here.
Our immediate family had a pattern where, we were making use of restaurants, always outdoors, right? And we were very careful about windows and things when somebody came into the house. And the problem is the weather is now taking the behaviors that were working and upending them. And so what that's resulting in is a kind of, since we're not in the frame of mind of thinking about COVID every minute of the day anymore, because we've just gotten used to it, we're now, thinking, well, we're not even thinking. So it's the idea is that restaurants were possible because outdoors was safe and it isn't highly transmissible in food. So the temptation is, we're back in restaurant mode where that restaurants are a possibility, but they may again not be a possibility based on the fact that the weather means that outdoor dining isn't happening anymore. So all of these things require sort of a rebooting of the conscious discussion of how can we prevent each other from getting COVID if somebody brings it to a gathering. And this is much more important than some fraction of the population seems to believe at the moment, based on the dire consequences for some people who get this thing, these months and months and months of, myriad different symptoms.
Yep. I will say that on our recent just 4-day trip to a place even farther north than we are now, we went to eat outside at a Mexican restaurant, and it turns out that despite what their website said, they were only open for takeout, but they were selling margaritas to drink while you waited for your takeout. So we sat outside and drank extraordinarily cold margaritas under a very cold sky and darkening sky. And I thought, this is not the conditions under which margaritas were invented. This is not the right circumstance to be drinking margaritas at all.
Yeah.
But the food was good.
Freezing your ass off in Margaritaville.
Exactly. All right. Question from the Discord this week. Humans are running on 10,000-year-old hardware. What's the evolutionary explanation for groups tearing themselves apart in moral panics like the Cathar heresy, Salem witch trials, the Red Scare, and cancel culture? So I'll let you take this, I will say that some of what, well, two things first before you take it, is that some of what we talked about with regard to Eric Hoffer was addressed some of this a bit. And then I'm not sure where the number 10,000-year-old hardware comes from. I think we've got 200,000-year-old hardware. The 10,000 number, the number that reminds me of is 10 to 12,000 years or so is about when agriculture was popping up in multiple places around the world, independently evolved in 3, 4, 5 places, depending. So our hardware is a lot older than 10,000 years. But other than that...
Well, what we say in our book is that the hardware varies a lot. So we've got, the basic platform was fully in place a couple 100,000 years ago. There's obviously some hardware level stuff that's altered in the post-farming era for humanity. Most of the hardware, almost all of the hardware, will be quite a bit more ancient than 10,000 years. But it doesn't really matter for this question, because the basic answer is you're dealing with evolved software. And I don't think the moral panics of this kind would have been very common pre-agriculture, because the shared fate aspect of very small groups of people living together wouldn't have tolerated it. And so, you're dealing with the 10.0 or 12.0 version of the culture, and that's where these things happen. And I do think it has a lot to do with what we discussed in the first hour, where you have competitive dynamics that cause a group that is in a position to do it to freeze out another group that isn't in a position to defend itself. Those who are frozen out rebel against the meritocratic system because they're not well armed for it, and therefore would be its losers, and they topple it, which causes a catastrophe, and rinse repeat.
Awesome.
I knew I could bring shampoo into it. So anyway, that's what it is. You're dealing with a culturally evolved phenomenon, not a genetically evolved one.
Yeah, this does remind me of the, to me, somewhat inexplicable final paragraph of this book, which I didn't share. I didn't share any of what I was going to talk with you about before we went on.
Yeah, we'll see if I can explic it once you've...
Yeah, explic this.
Okay, fair enough.
Remember, written in 1951. J.B.S. Haldane counts fanaticism among the only 4 really important inventions made between 3000 BC and 1400 AD. It was a Judaic-Christian invention, and it is strange to think that in receiving this malady of the soul, the world also received a miraculous instrument for raising societies and nations from the dead, an instrument of resurrection. Right?
Wow.
Like, where does that paragraph even come from? Haldane. He's finishing with Haldane. He's one of the important.
So I like the idea that fanaticism has an origin, in
the Judeo-Christian tradition, although, like, on what basis? So Haldane is one of the framers of the modern synthesis. Yeah, right?
Yeah.
So he was a very important early mid 20th century evolutionary biologist. If you can hear that, that is Zach, the producer, trying to deal with the 2 kittens and their penchant for, I don't know what they're doing, eating pens, something, destroying curtains.
Something bad.
Yeah. So, apparently Haldane, I really didn't expect to see Haldane quoted in this book, and he wasn't until the very last paragraph, like I said, counts fanaticism among the only 4 really important inventions made between 3000 BC and 1400 AD. How would he even, where did he just pull those numbers out of his ass, I think?
I don't know. He was a pretty careful thinker. It sort of needs more than the paragraph to know what he was getting at.
Yeah. All right. Okay. First question from last hour, episode 51. Twin studies, etc., show that shared family environment only accounts for a small percentage in variance of intelligence in adulthood. Can an individual parent still have a large influence by using an unorthodox parenting style and becoming a statistical outlier on purpose?
Yes, I would caution people. I don't think we know nearly as much about how these things are inherited, and there are many very subtle mechanisms by which things can appear to be genetically encoded, and therefore parents have very little influence, yada, yada, yada. This can't possibly be right. It cannot logically be correct, right? So the question is, how is it incorrect? And once you're at the how is it incorrect, then the landscape is pretty open from the point of view of mechanisms to influence. So do not take this stuff as gospel that says there's very little that can be done. The very fact of parenting being the highly intensive, long-standing activity that it is, and childhood being so darn long, tells you that this is a very important set of interactions.
Exactly. We have the longest childhoods per lifespan of anyone on the planet, and every organism with a long childhood has a long childhood because they are being parented and they are learning how to be the adults they will become. This is what
Except
childhood
cicadas.
is. That's not childhood. That's stasis. So also rotifers, I suspect. Right? Like being able to just like cheating. That was cheating.
No, well, they do have a very
not
long.
All not all hashtag.
Right.
Not all cicadas.
Not all
Bret.
cicadas.
Only periodical
Wow.
cicadas.
Oh, this is getting ugly.
Yep.
No, but they do have this very long larval stage attached to the roots of trees.
Yes. 13 or 17 years.
But they are
depending.
the exception.
Yes.
Everything else that has a long childhood has a long childhood. I mean, there's probably other
I
exceptions.
just don't think that counts as childhood. For one thing, well,
it's
okay.
a dreary childhood. I will grant you that.
And it's totally isolated. I don't think that we need actually to accessorize the term childhood by specifying that it's with others of your species, but that's the primary reason that I am declaring that the childhood of periodical cicadas for 13 or 17 years is not, in fact, a childhood.
All right.
Okay. Both men and women, parentheses mammals, are physiologically sexually activated with erection or clitoral encouragement during REM sleep from a very young age onward, even though the content of our dreams is often not of a romantic nature. Do you have a hypothesis why?
I don't think we have the ability to know what such states are correlated with cognitively. I mean, how would we even?
Right.
What I would say is you've got a system in which the purpose of the system is the propagation of certain genetic spellings. And I mean, this is the reason human beings are fascinated by sex, is that it matters evolutionarily. And so at some level, dreams are an adaptive phenomenon. This is clear by virtue of the fact that they're expensive and persistent. It is not surprising that there is sexually relevant content throughout them, and that it has some sort of relationship to physiological states. I mean, we could pursue this in all kinds of directions, but I would just say you've got a state dependence issue where arousal accompanies sexual success in waking life, and therefore the scenario building surrounding attaining that success in sleeping life should be accompanied with physiological states that are consistent with it. So something in that neighborhood. But I guess what I would say is I think I hear in your question the suggestion that those physiological states during REM sleep are uncorrelated with dreams that would make sense of them. And I just don't know how we would know that. If there's a way to know that, I'd be very curious.
Mm-hmm. And your suspicion is that there is sexual or romantic content related to
I think I would
physiological sexual activity.
I would put it in a different way, which is sure to be misunderstood. But basically, if all human activity is a means to an end that goes through sexual interaction, then what exactly is, what is non-sexual thought? The point is it all heads that direction, though very indirectly.
Right.
So anyway, it's a high bar, but
Yep. Would a Biden win effectively reward and reinforce pre-election political violence? I am a lifelong Democrat, no fan of Trump, but to me, a Dem win would mean the normalization of political violence in all election years henceforth would be like 2020. Yeah, they're throwing a tantrum, and they are. Yeah, I think yes, and yet I've heard exactly the opposite argument as well. that a Trump win will mean that the pre-election political violence gets worse, and therefore that's why you need to vote for Biden. I mean, maybe that's the same argument.
No.
I feel like I've heard all versions of this, and I don't
Yes.
think I just quite said exactly the opposite version that I was trying to. But
I think people are talking themselves into, well, there's a simple answer, and it involves doing X or not doing X.
yeah, but I don't think this question is a simple. This strikes me as true.
Oh, I think it's absolutely
Yes.
true. But what I would say is violence is a means to an end. The end has to do with power and resources.
Mhm.
So what I would say is I would expect a Trump win to produce one reaction, which might well be a continuation of violence. And I would expect a Biden win to change the nature at which power is being wielded. What I do not expect, which I have heard people argue for, is the idea that if Biden wins, this madness, the woke madness, will stop, right?
Yeah.
I think this is utter nonsense. It is completely illogical. This woke madness is about power. It has discovered how much power it has, and it has every reason to continue that, irrespective of who wins. And so I would expect it to function through the Biden administration,
Yes.
even if it doesn't remain in the streets.
Yeah, it'll look different, but this continues the lie. And some people I think are generally confused, but some people are just lying when they say that the craziness that we saw, in fact, after the 2016 election was a result of the 2016 election. No, and we saw a particular version of it, of course, being still at Evergreen at that time, but all of the chaos and even violence that happened on the campus of Evergreen that year after November, whatever it was, 2016, when Trump was elected, through May 23rd, 2017 and beyond, when the protests and the riots first erupted in force at Evergreen, were not the beginning. They were not the beginning. Campus was already going crazy for years before then. And it was facilitated by leadership that tolerated it. And so, look to the leadership who's tolerating this, and don't imagine that this is somehow Trump's fault. That is a ridiculously juvenile argument.
Yeah, it doesn't fit with how this unfolded.
No, it doesn't.
Trump changed it
for sure, and he played it,
Yep.
and he profited from it, but he did not create it.
Yep.
He did not create it. Oh, where am I? Here we go. Hey, Bret. France gets 75% of their electricity from nuclear power.
Yep.
Some five-eyed children just saw a mushroom cloud rise over the minarets of Paris. 3 out of 2 people have cancer. Naturally, I stand with you on your villainization of nuclear power.
Thank goodness. Your math needs work. Come on, let's not play games like this. The fact is, nuclear power is a gamble. When fission power was first deployed for electrical power generation, the idea was that we would figure out what to do with the waste, and we never have. And what's more, we've proven that the mechanisms that we thought might work don't. So I'm not demonizing nuclear power. For one thing, as I keep saying, nuclear power isn't one thing, it's 2 opposite things. And I am very much a proponent of the second thing, that is to say, fusion power. With respect to fission power, is there a way it could be done safely? I remain to be convinced, but it certainly can't be done safely with the modern or the most recent generation of reactors. You would need different reactors. You might need a different fuel source. But in any
Because
case,
of the potential for positive feedback and runaway meltdowns.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the meltdown potential. And even when it doesn't melt down, the generation of large amounts of waste that is highly radioactive for thousands of years is, it's just going to continue to build up. It's eventually going to find its way into the environment. Let's not pretend this is a simpler problem than it is.
It seems like moral systems need a place to experiment and to evolve. They have such long-term consequences that we can't design them. Would you agree? How would we create these spaces?
Seems like moral systems need a place to experiment. Well, we have this. What we don't have is a proper boundary. In other words, we have tremendous freedom to choose our level of adherence inside of a moral system. And this is a feature of almost all, maybe all, religious structures, for example. There are people who are orthodox. There are people who are more liberal in their view. And in some sense, these things are in competition with each other. And so that experimentation occurs. The hazard becomes in secular society or pluralistic society, you have the danger of profiting from opting out of moral restrictions that bind everyone else. And so a temporary advantage to atheists or those who behave like them can destabilize an entire system because not everybody is equally bound. So that, I think, is the hazard. Within any of these groups, a sectarian or other difference in levels of adherence naturally runs the experiment in question.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess I would add to that, just I would have framed this slightly differently and said, this reminds me of adaptive landscapes, right? That you are, if you are looking for a moral system that is better than the one that you or the populace are in, you cannot blueprint it and say, go there. You can get off the peak you're on and get onto another slope and see what happens. And that's, what does that get on a different slope and see what happens look like? Like, how do you create that space? I don't have a decent answer. And I think that's part of what you were trying to answer there. But I totally agree that designing the endpoint is not going to be the savvy way to do it, savvy approach, because it's just not going to be possible. The left seems highly capable of unearthing, parentheses, generating problems. However, it does not seem capable at all of solving them. Does it lack any sort of implementation arm? Does it gatekeep people that would be in said arm based on aesthetics? I'm not sure what that last part means.
I'm not the left. I mean, if you mean the American blue team, that's one thing. But the left itself, I mean, progressives have engaged in a tremendous amount of highly effective solution making and are not getting credit because that which passes for progressive these days is so crazy that it makes it look like it's an insane way to think.
Yeah. Right now, not so much, but from the, 60s, 70s and before, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I would also say, in light of the consideration of Hoffer's book that you engaged in the first hour, there's a dynamic that has to be unpacked to the extent that what is passing as left now are basically authoritarians rejecting a system. That's not the same thing as actual progressives proposing how society might be altered, bettered, fixed.
Yes. Yes, good. You spoke of Jordan Peterson's book, Maps of Meaning, and its cover art. It is a sculpture he made in 1985 as a graduate student, called The Meaning of Music. To be an object that changes as you look at it, like a Necker cube. What did it remind Bret of? We don't have it, else I'd show it here.
Yeah. What it reminded me of is what I called pie chart language. So there is a missing bridge between ecological thinking and evolutionary thinking. It's not that it is not obvious to many people that such a bridge is necessary, but the first forays into making that bridge, basically evolutionary ecology, kind of died on the vine, and it did not take over and fuse the two disciplines the way it should have. So as I was trying to build the proper tools for thinking about evolution and ecology, it became clear that one needed to use pie charts in order to understand populations, growth, frontiers, etc. and that what happened is that slices of pie grew, so they didn't fit the original confines of the pie. And anyway, I built a little proto-language that allowed the description of an event in terms of how it affected the fortunes of multiple populations simultaneously dividing up a world of resources, in which the world of resources changed its volume based on what was discovered.
So basically, once you move from zero sum into non-zero sum dynamics, you can still use this sort of new form of pie chart. Pie charts haven't been much reviled in scientific literature, but you were using this new form of pie charts to describe not just relative growth within a population, but the growth of the opportunity under non-zero sum dynamics.
Positive sum, negative sum, and zero sum dynamics inhabiting the same pie chart was what was necessary in order to talk about competition between populations, for example. Anyway, so it looked to me a lot like that diagram.
That's good. I didn't know that, actually.
At some point, I want to sit down with Jordan and talk to him about what he was getting at there and see if there's any analogy between them.
Yeah. I am a mental health nurse, now required to attend healing racial trauma training. Oh. Presenter's website full of CRT lingo, critical race theory lingo. Sent letter to my human resources person with help from James Lindsay website, New Discourses. I'm now nervous in Ann Arbor. Thoughts? Love you too. I'll bet Ann Arbor's gone a bit woke. That's where we did our graduate work, and it was a lovely, lovely town. A bit cold at some times of the year, but
a bit hot at other times of the year.
Yeah, I could deal with the hot more easily. But yeah, I'll bet that R1 university in a relatively small town with a lot of culture and a fair bit of federal money coming in from grants has made it pretty woke, and I feel your pain. You don't say what has happened. Maybe you've just sent the letter to HR and you don't have a response yet. I don't know what to say more than that.
I mean, unfortunately, I think there is nothing to say. It's dangerous. I hope it goes well. I do think we need to develop a modality, as we started to on our last podcast, getting people to write down their faulty claims so that they are checkable in the future and that they cannot escape them is one feature of that landscape. In this case,
if it's a training, you can't ask the person doing the training to do this.
I don't think that one's applicable here, but what would I do here? I think I would be trying to introduce the idea that solution you are proposing is a threat to something that is serving everyone. In other words, there's a problem to be solved. The solution you are proposing to it threatens to destroy much more than you realize is in its scope. And I don't know, frankly, I don't think an individual is going to be, in general, in any position at all to do that in a context like the one you describe. But somehow, to the extent that we, as a larger group of people talking about this, can lodge in the discussion, in fact, I was talking to Douglas Murray in my podcast with him several days ago, and he pointed out, so my claim to him was that the woke revolution is actually going to destroy, we've got a system that fails to meet its objective. There's a gap between what it does and what it aspires to do, but that the challenge to the system as a whole is going to evaporate the well-being that the system is delivering and distributing, yes, unfairly, but distributing to everybody. And what Douglas said that I was unaware of, he said this is reminiscent of Kant's point about the bird that thinks that the air, which is causing drag, yes, is the obstacle to it flying really fast. And if only the air could be done away with, it would be that much speedier, when in fact...
Man, wouldn't that be the life?
Yeah, when it can't fly at all without the air. So to the extent that we can start making this point to people, look, you have no idea what you are threatening. Yes, there are real problems with how well-being and opportunity are distributed. There just are. But you're going to kill the thing that makes well-being exist at all and it's not going to be good for anybody, including the people that you think you're helping. So I don't know that we can make that resonate, but it's the kind of thing, one person saying it isn't going to be enough, saying it multiple times isn't going to be enough, but to the extent that that message begins to come from different places, and it causes some who are on this bandwagon to think, oh, wait a second, I could evaporate the very thing that I'm trying to see distributed more fairly.
I'm trying to enhance mental health, for instance, across people, and attending a healing racial trauma training, having to incorporate such thinking into the rest of what I do may actually cause everything to decline in quality. And,
Yes.
I feel certain it absolutely will, but you obviously have to couch things more gently for an audience that can't hear it.
Yeah. And I would also just add this whole idea of healing racial trauma. It sounds so right. And it is so backwards, because the fact is, what you actually need is opportunity. If you've been frozen out of opportunity, what you need is opportunity and the tools to make use of it. And my experience dealing with people all over the world is, as soon as you have that opportunity and the tools to utilize it, the trauma scars over. Right? It's not like it's gone. It's not like the history evaporates. But the point is, it is not an obstacle to day-to-day well-being, functioning, happiness, any of those things, as soon as the problem is addressed.
Well, this is an analogy that you've used under a lot of, in a lot of circumstances here, but it really is so apt, is that we will all experience injury in life, some of it literal, some of it metaphorical. And at first it creates wounds, and long term, as short term as possible, we hope that it scars over, such that the wounds are a thing of the past without ever pretending that the injury did not happen. You retain the scar, you don't retain the wound. And that so much of the modern ideology is about picking and picking and picking and picking and making sure that you never scar over, so that there was always exposed wound to display to people and to announce about how awful you have it and how it can never be made right. And that is in part a result of the constant picking at it.
Yes, keeping the wound open, because the wound is your entitlement to be given something.
Yeah, and what, the injury happened. Whatever. In some cases, people are just making shit up, right? But presume that there's something real here. The injury happened. The scar can still be your indicator of injury, but also allow you to move forward. And a wound specifically keeps you mired in the past and keeps you from becoming anything better. And part of it is exactly what we're talking about in the first hour. Your pessimism about being able to fix whole swaths of the population is, I think, in part based on you seeing that so many people are busy picking at their wounds, sure, 100. I know it's not entirely. I know that there's another big part of it, which is that they arrive. You are arguing without an ability to without an ability to win in a meritocracy.
Yeah, without tools.
But certainly it only makes it worse if what is being told to them, and this is happening in the K-12 schools and higher ed. So this is happening for people across all levels where they still could generate a toolkit with which to actually move forward with creativity and analysis and productivity. And if what they're being told instead is keep focusing on your wounds and the wounds of others and how wounded they are compared to you, well, no one's going to win ultimately, except the very few people who are in charge of, wound defining.
Yeah, I would say that if we go back to the question of, can we agree on a collective objective that replaces the left-right oscillation as a control mechanism? The point is, look, you have an obligation to make yourself as capable as possible, right? To scar over rather than keep your wounds open. Having done that, we have an obligation to make the system fair, right? To the extent that the system isn't fair, we have work to do, but you also have work to do. And it is the partnership between those things. You make yourself as capable as possible.
Yep.
We'll make the system fair, as quickly as possible. That's the shared objective. And it doesn't involve I'm not going to make myself capable at all, because the reason I'm not capable is unfairness, and, take care of me. Like, that's just not a stable long-term pattern.
Right. You're at 50 minutes. Oh, are you kidding? Okay. We got to get through 3 more here, and then we'll move into the next hour's questions. Bret, based on your Twitter banner, you seem to like pygmy owls. With how bad Twitter and Facebook are, why not come to Discord instead? The DarkHorse server even has a pygmy owl keeping conversations civil and on topic. Hoot hoot.
So that pygmy owl picture, I'm a budding, longtime nature photographer, and that pygmy owl was a very lucky get on my part. I actually screwed it up the first time. I thought it was a little piece of leaf matter caught in a tree, and I walked up on it too quickly and spooked it.
Was this at Camp Westwoods? Was
Yep.
that on the Oregon coast?
Yeah.
With our class.
I was kicking myself. This beautiful animal had been in a place where I could have taken a great photo of it, and it had flown off because I didn't interpret it correctly. And then I thought, it looked awfully happy in that spot. I wonder if that's a hunting perch, and it sits there often. And so on the walk back, I set the camera very carefully for what I thought it was going to need, and I walked around the corner very slowly so I didn't spook the animal. And sure enough, he was sitting right there, and I shot a bunch of pictures and got a good one.
Nice.
So anyway, I do like pygmy owls. Diurnal owl, by the way. That does not address your point at all, that Twitter is a hazardous place that doesn't deserve my owl picture and I should take it somewhere else. But anyway, I'll take it under advisement. Yes, what's
going on, man? From an evolutionary standpoint, why has violence reduced over the ages? Has just the propensity for physical violence reduced, or has the concept of violence just morphed into something else, causing us to have a false sense of security?
I would say that this is actually the same thing that we've been kind of addressing over several different questions here, which is violence is not a good way of fixing things. It's a very wasteful mechanism, right? Does it work? Does it keep people in line? Does the threat of violence get them to do things that they should? Probably. But the point is, if you can get the same system to reduce the violence necessary in order to get people to behave, in other words, if you can ritualize the violence, or if you can encode it in something else so it doesn't actually require people to engage in it, that's better. And so, in effect, we have all agreed to be less violent in order to accomplish those things that we agree are good when we accomplish them. Mm-hmm. And I would expect that pattern to grow greater and greater over time, because violence is hazardous and expensive.
That's right. And I guess, Zach, if you would just show this screen for the moment. Here's a Robert Sapolsky, the great Robert Sapolsky, writing in 2006 for Foreign Affairs, a piece that he called A Natural History of Peace, something that I used to assign to my animal behavior students, which I recommend this should be findable if you search on A Natural History of Peace, Sapolsky, the magazine Foreign Affairs, and he walks through some of what it is that we look like as humans compared to some of the other primates.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Great. Final question here before we move over to this hour's question. So this is actually someone has written in several times with a link. Here's a totally new cyclical evolutionary hypothesis. The hypothesis explains political polarizations through biology, through cyclical hormone levels in history, explains how hormone levels of oxytocin and vasopressin create the left versus right ideologies, and explains how populist nationalism is created by hormones. So that link is here. Zach, you can show this again. I believe the person writing in the question is the author here. It's a work in progress. It is, the title is Cyclical Evolution Hypothesis, Generationally Oscillating Birth Cohort Specific Hypothalamic Hormone Levels create physiological, cognitive, and behavioral differences in cyclical animal populations, including human populations. So obviously these just came in. Neither of us has had a chance to do anything but read the title. But my first reaction is that this is putting the proximate before the ultimate. This is effectively putting the cart before the horse. So it may well be true that you're onto something interesting here. But citing hormone levels, even cyclically fluctuating hormone levels that are reliable across individuals, is primarily a proximate level analysis of what is going on rather than an evolutionary level analysis, because the hormones will follow what is selected for, with relatively rare events where you're just limited. You have phylogenetic constraints. So for instance, we can't get to a better eye in vertebrates because it would require going through blindness to get to, say, a cephalopod eye. This will not be clear to anyone who hasn't ever thought about cephalopod eyes, but basically like an octopus eye is built better and we'd be able to see better for more cheaply if we had one of their eyes. But in order to make it, we'd have to go back through not having eyes at all. And so basically evolution can't get there. Selection won't take us there. Whereas cyclical hormone levels could be modified, and we know that they do get modified pretty regularly. So I would say that the question is likely to need to be, how do cyclical hormone levels serve what is being selected for, as opposed to using the cyclical hormone levels as an answer? They are, in fact, an observation that warrants a question rather than an answer.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit like saying, 20th century nation scale violence is the result of low voltage fluctuations, right? Because you don't go to war in the 20th century without making some phone calls. And so if you were to track, low voltage oscillations on phone wires.
I had no idea where you were going.
Well, now you do.
Okay.
If you were to track, phone calls out of the Pentagon or whatever, you might register. There was a whole bunch of, phone traffic, and if you mistook the phone traffic as causing the wars, you'd think, well, this is important because it happens. It's every single war you get, phone calls.
Okay, so that's good. I like that, but it's not quite sufficient, I don't think, because that's a more standard like correlation causation conflation.
No. This is the same thing.
Okay,
I'm saying exactly what you're saying, which is that the phone calls are involved in how wars happen. Mm-hmm. And if you therefore track them, you will detect something. But your point is the evolutionary dynamics are going to control why the hormones are fluctuating rather than the hormones fluctuating causing the dynamic.
So maybe it really just is. Maybe the proximate ultimate, the confusion that many people have in science and biology and evolutionary biology, even, although more rarely, have between the proximate level, the sort of mechanism level of what's happening and how it's happening, versus the ultimate level of why it's happening at the evolutionary level, is in fact just a fancy deep history conflation of correlation and causation, which I'd never actually thought to put in those terms before, but I think that's right.
I think that is right.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'd be interested in looking more deeply into what you've written, and it's possible that it's just that the title is leading us to imagine that this is a conflation that's here. But I would guess if you're thinking this is downstream of the hormones, then the hormones are downstream of something else, and it would be well worth understanding what it was that caused the hormone fluctuations.
Yeah, and not to say that hormone levels aren't very interesting. In fact, my some of my prelim work in grad school was looking at the ways that androgens, the so-called male-specific hormones like testosterone and androstenedione, actually affect female behavior in primates and actually drive things like friendship between females. So that is not the evolutionary, the bigger level evolutionary question of like why is there sociality? Why do females have friends at all? What drives those friendships? But looking at the hormonal indicators of those friendships is another piece of the puzzle that can be interesting. So we're not dismissing this, just saying that it's not likely to be the top level driver. Yeah.
It also raises the question of whether or not you could have toxic masculinity in women.
Absolutely.
Oh my God. That's a frightening thought.
Not really. Okay. Questions from this hour. Bret, if the opportunity to fix my toolkit has been largely lost, he's quoting, I think, you from last hour, why am I listening to you? Are you saying I should just die? Maybe rethink that. So obviously slightly snarky here, but I mean, I feel him. Like, this is what I felt pushing back against you at the end of last hour. Like, what? Like, really?
Yeah, but okay, here's the thing. Human being is a fantastically capable creature, and we are all being hobbled by this very stupid civilization that takes what could be marvelous tools and dulls them for decade upon decade before setting you loose to do someone else's bidding in the marketplace. So, are you damaged? No doubt, my friend, you're damaged. Are you in a position to better yourself? Of course you are, and you should, right? Whatever damage we have all sustained and however much we may have lost out on opportunities that we might have availed ourselves of, the difference between throwing in the towel and attempting to make the tools as sharp as possible and wield them as well as possible, it's a gigantic difference. So of course you should upgrade them. But I don't want to pretend like we're in a position to make you a journeyman, whatever, if the opportunity has been lost, right? Yep. So, and please don't take this the wrong way. At some level, it isn't about you. It's about the fact that we are going to continue to do this for generation after generation of human beings that are not yet damaged, right? We do not have to damage them in the same way, even if we are not fully rescuable. So let's get over the idea that we need to be fully rescuable for rescue to be a worthwhile topic. And let's just please not do it to any more kids.
Yeah. Amen. You hate the DNC? Yeah, you know me. You hate the RNC? Yeah, you know me. You hate FB policy? Yep, you know me. Who's down with unity? This whole podcast live stream. That wasn't a question.
It was some kind of poetry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From someone else who sometimes gives us poetry.
Oh, wait a second. No, that's a permutation of a song lyric that I can't quite resurrect.
So you would be far more likely than me. Yeah, look it up if you would, Zach. Okay, I'm going to move on. Tell us when you got it. After 2016, I asked myself what the left could have done to lose to this guy, and I came upon identity politics and abandoning the working class. If Trump wins again, how can we best ask this of lefties after this election? Oh my God, the left really seems determined. Really seems determined to not learn the lessons.
It does. And
so determined.
The idea, I mean, really, at some level, one wants to say, you did this. And if you don't understand how that happened, you're going to keep doing it and it won't last. You have to stop. And this is in fact exactly why I'm completely unpersuaded by any of these arguments about you must vote for or whatever it is that people are telling you must vote for in this context.
Yeah.
The answer is, unless you are thinking about the fact that this dynamic is making things worse and worse over time and that we have to escape it, then you're not in a position to say who you must vote for, because as bad as Trump is, he could be far worse. And it is not at all clear that Biden coming into power isn't going to make things worse by cynically playing along with this woke ideology. So we haven't been given a good option. You're going to therefore avail yourself of a not so good option, whatever it may be. This is exactly the topic I wrote about in my essay right before the conclusion of the 2016 election. There was not a single choice you could make in that election that rendered you harmless. We are once again there.
Yeah.
So I found the song if you want to know it. It is OPP by Naughty by Nature. I'm not totally sure. That is
excellent.
I'm not going to look it up and try. I've never heard it, so I can't possibly do justice to it.
Yep.
Or I don't know that I've heard it. I don't at least recognize it from those modified lyrics. Okay. Following your episode on evolutionary dentistry, can you discuss evolutionary ophthalmology? Should kids wear glasses? What's your take on refractive surgery? Oh, man. Echo. Such good questions always from you. We should spend some time another time talking about this in some more depth. Let me take the slightly easier part first. If your question about refractive surgery is like Lasik, which I think it's going to be, so like basically cutting slits in the cornea to change the curvature of the lens. If we had the precision to actually do that and we expected that the eye wasn't changing shape over time, which it is, then it might be a reasonable surgery. I was actually days away from having that surgery myself. I have had myopia since I was pretty bad myopia since I was 13, and I was lucky enough to have ended up with a crazy eye fungus from Madagascar, which had me forced to put the surgery off, which I had scheduled for after I came back from this 5-month field season in Madagascar, during which time I spent some more time looking into what success in LASIK actually means. And it turns out that anything at 2200 or better, which may or may not be improvable with glasses or contacts afterwards, is called success. And so obviously if you're doing things like playing sports and spending long times in the field alone, and you rely on your eyesight, that doesn't actually sound like success. So I don't know if that surgery has improved since then, but I guarantee you that given that, like teeth, eyes change over time. Like teeth change in terms of where they are positioned over time, and they actually have a dynamic tension in the jaw, as you heard Bret talking about with Mike Mew in the Evolutionary Dentistry episode. We know that the eye changes shape over time, and it also becomes harder. The cornea becomes harder over time, and this is a large part of what like middle-aged presbyopia is about, is not being able to move back and forth between different focal lengths as quickly. So the idea of these quick fixes that will simply correct you into perfection really ignores almost everything about what we are as organisms. And you want to say something about I
would say, one, we are screwing children up. Two, part of this is natural. In other words, the invention of printed material creates a dynamic that is unnatural, and the value of printed material is presumably high. So, by having people read at a close distance, we are disrupting a system in which the development of the eye would be normal. This is likely the reason that we have so much eye dysfunction, the idea that it is genetically encroachment of mutations is nonsense, just as it is with the teeth. But two things. One, the eye takes its shape in large measure because of the musculature within the eye, which adjusts the eye based on the distortion.
Not within the eye, but the extrinsic eye muscles around the eyeball.
Well, I don't want to say too much because I don't know. But yes, you've got extrinsic eye muscles. There may also be endogenous stuff. But the basic point is you are built to fix your own vision, right? How do you do that? On the basis of information about the distortion in your vision. What happens if you take distorted vision and you correct it externally? Well, now the data coming in results in you not fixing your own vision in a context where you're going to destroy your own vision by focusing very closely, and this is going to be screens too. Now, here's the part maybe you don't see coming.
It's kind of like taking the anti-fragility away from the feedback system between person and eye. Like you create a fragile system where it was anti-fragile. It did correct on the basis of insults that came in, and insults being, wow, that thing is out of focus. I really can't see what that thing is. Oh, I keep on running into things that are out of focus. Maybe the extrinsic eye muscles or whatever it is need to change the curvature of my lens such that that thing that I keep on running into that keeps on being out of focus is no longer out of focus.
Right, exactly. And look, you've got basically a video camera made out of biological goo, right? It's not going to be perfect. It's not precision ground. So the idea that musculature is going to correct for those distortions, that's a marvelous, beautiful biological solution to a biological problem. You now take a ground glass lens and you distort the the information coming in, preventing the eye from fixing itself. Now what have you got? Well, it is almost a definition of fragility, because the fact is all of you folks who walk around needing glasses are dependent on the mechanism that produces glasses. What would you do if civilization came apart and it wasn't making glasses anymore, right? So you've been rendered, you're rendered fragile by this. And it's not that serious in a world where lots of people are wearing glasses and civilization can produce them. But it is a solvable problem in the following sense. A, we probably now have the technology. We didn't 50 years ago, but we probably now have the technology to take whatever close focus work kids need to do in order to educate themselves or whatever, and to place it in a context where it appears to be far away. Like imagine that you are reading a book on a screen in a movie theater 30 feet from you, right? That might change the dynamic, so you didn't destroy your own vision in reading, So I don't love at all the idea of kids wearing VR goggles that place printed material effectively 30 feet from them in order not to destroy their vision, but I like it a lot better than destroying their vision. So maybe there's some way it could be done that wouldn't be so intrusive, but at the very least, this is the same thing that we were just talking about. All right, we're screwed up. Let's not screw up another generation of eyes, right? Let's let the next generation of kids have normal eyes and normal teeth by fixing the thing that we do that screws up every generation upon arrival.
Yeah. So one thing, one more thing now, but we will continue to talk about this. To your question, should kids wear glasses? One thing that we have suggested is, if your kid is myopic and he or she is at risk, like really does seem to need some correction in order to move around the universe, consider undercorrecting.
Yeah.
Consider, whatever their diopter is, correcting one, half stop, full stop. That's camera language, but whatever it is below that, such that their eyes. An ophthalmologist isn't going to like this, just like most dentists don't want to hear what Mike Mew has to say. But, the kid who has to squint a little bit to see the thing, but can make it out, their eyes are likely to keep on working to get it right. And rather than give them the fully cushy, this is great, I could just relax into, failing further.
Yeah.
Right.
So along these lines, let me just say that as a kid, I was diagnosed with, I definitely was diagnosed with astigmatism and who knows what else. And I was given glasses that I was supposed to wear as a kid. I was supposed to be wearing bifocals. And I basically thought, fuck that. And so I didn't wear them ever. My eyes corrected themselves, and I had vision that needed no correction whatsoever until I got to 50 and reading glasses became a thing. But the point is, that was an anecdotal demonstration of the fact that the eyes, given the opportunity, given data that actually comes in normally, were in a position to fix themselves, where I was being told, that I had a problem that required intervention.
And just, if we're doing anecdote, as you know, my anecdotal experience runs not at all like that, right? Like my parents discovered that I was already having trouble seeing when we were on vacation, and they were going, look at the beautiful waterfalls across the ravine. And I was like, I don't see them. They took me to the eye doctor. I already had 2200 vision, and I got contacts very quickly. And within a few years, I had 2800 vision, where it has basically, within 4 or 5 years, it just like shot down to 2800.
Well, I don't know that story goes in the opposite direction.
And then it stabilized, and it's kind of getting slightly better now that sort of the middle-aged presbyopia is also setting in. But the diopter's basically down at like -7, -6.5. And I was already not seeing all that well, but not saying anything about it because it just seemed like what was normal.
Right. But you had your nose buried in books and you were reading music hours a day.
But I was also outside playing sports and running around.
Right. But my point is that may be a job. That breadth of activity and the feedbacks in it may be beyond the capacity of the eyes to figure out how to correct, and it may have biased in one direction and not the other. Who knows? But at the very least, hey, you know what we need? Evolutionary ophthalmology. Wouldn't that be grand if people were actually studying these questions rationally, not blaming genes, which obviously are not going to be the explanation here.
Yep.
And we stopped screwing up kids.
Yeah.
Hour 15 minutes.
Okay, we're going to get through a couple more of these because we've only done 4 this hour so far. So at least a few more than 2 more. I submitted an article to Quillette today titled Letter to a Woke Heart. If it is accepted, I hope it does some good. Can I send you a copy by email? We have a moderator on who can give you an email address, I think, and I'm not going to promise, but I will be interested to look at it probably.
Yep.
Yes. 3 people who received Facebook bans: Alex Jones, Bret, and Rose McGowan. Politics makes strange bedfellows. The power of 3 will set us free. Good
Well,
Lord.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
I find it weird that the executive of telling people to do things at the point of a gun is also looked to as the person to ask us to do something.
I don't know what that refers to.
I don't either. I'm sorry. I don't know what that refers to. M. Sandel critiques meritocracy even if our opportunities are equal for all, because it legitimates the inequalities that follow from innate differences in talent and virtue. Thoughts? Here's a review.
Yeah.
I don't know who that is. M.
It doesn't
Sandel.
matter.
Okay.
It's clear from the question.
Yeah, I think so too. But
Here's the problem. You're leaping to the conclusion that there are going to be large innate differences, right? Personally, I would argue that is unlikely to be true. There will be differences, but are they innate, immutable, etc.? And so anyway, we're not going to know this until we actually democratize access, right? Democratizing access is the thing that will tell us whether or not those differences are durable. But at the very least, you could build a world, and we should build a world, in which access is democratized. You do have meritocracy, which properly incentivizes people to produce cool stuff that enriches humanity, in which you are protected from bad luck. That is to say, you're not going to fall off the bottom of the ladder if you tried and failed. And the fact is, in such a context, differences in well-being are tolerable. You don't want extreme differences in well-being. You don't want concentration of opportunity. But the world in which we are all rendered equally well off is not a desirable world. For one thing, if you built that world where we were all equally well off, it has a huge defect in it too, which is that it makes people well off who didn't do anything, and therefore is effectively punishing those who contribute most. So what I would say, what a conclusion I came to in a conversation I had last week, was that there's a difference between those of us who think equality is the objective and those of us who think it's a means to an end. And the fact is, equality of opportunity as means to an end is the prerequisite for the best system that we have come up with, and probably the best one possible. Equality of outcome is a devastating and terrible system, and there's really a huge difference between these things.
FYI, Jordan Peterson describes the Maps of Meaning logo as the meaning of music. I think we already heard
but he's
this.
provided a link to that description, so it might be that the answer to my question is buried in that video. Great,
thank you. Some weeks ago, you could not identify freedom is slavery in the current movement. That being one of the 3. Hey, stop, sweetie. That being one of the 3 sayings in the beginning of 1984 on the
Great Pyramid.
The Ministry of Truth, I think.
Yeah.
Freedom implies responsibility for your own life. For a lot of people, responsibility feels a lot like slavery. Freedom is slavery is therefore Hoffer, but shorter. That's interesting.
I think that's quite right.
Yeah, good. Keep up the terrific work, guys. Thank you.
All right, that's not a bad idea.
Enough with the partisan mods. I know you support free expression. I don't think our mods are partisan. I'm sure they make decisions that not everyone agrees with all the time, but we know who they are, and they are awesome. So
I'm sure they're partisan, but I don't know which party.
Actually, yes. Actually, yeah. Yes. Do you two plan to write in Peter Boghossian for mayor? If I lived there, I would. Hardest part of that choice is spelling it. Well, you spelled it correctly. No.
I love Peter.
Yeah.
I think he'd make a much better mayor than either of these crazy people. That said, you got to understand what we're actually facing in Portland. And it's not that we have seen an effort that makes Peter a viable candidate. So I think this is that, and Heather and I have talked about this at length, that there's a very different logic that unfolds inside of our local election than unfolds in our presidential national election. So I would just say this is not the place for a symbolic challenge to the two other mayoral candidates. This is a case where Iannarone has to be defeated because Iannarone has to be defeated because she is going to make a terrible situation vastly worse.
So there's no duopoly in Portland. In fact, it's not part of the problem. There just aren't even two parties. There's just no Republicans anywhere close. So there's no tension between like Democrats and Republicans here. We've got Wheeler, who's like the George Bridges of Portland. That's just an evergreen reference. He's woke, he's weak, he's ridiculous. I think he means well somewhere deep in his heart, and he just barely began to speak out against Antifa in the last week or two, at which point Iannarone, who identifies as an anti-fascist, responded to him and said he was alt-right and playing footsie with white nationalists. I don't know if she said that last part, but she said the first part. She's crazy. He is an incompetent boob. He's a Democrat. I don't know what she calls herself. But in Portland, unlike at the national scale, votes actually have a chance of mattering. And it's not a duopoly. We aren't being forced to decide between the lesser of two evils, even though Wheeler's an incompetent boob. But if Iannarone gets the mayorship of Portland, Portland may well fall. Like, I don't know if Portland can withstand that. She is an extremely dangerous character.
It's refreshing to hear an endorsement of a candidate with the phrase "incompetent boob." That's not common that people make endorsements in that kind of language.
I feel free not to vote for either of the decrepit clowns in the national election. I hate it. I wish I could vote for someone who I hoped would win, but I won't vote for either of them. I'm voting for the incompetent boob for Portland. I wish I could vote for Pete. He's a friend of ours, and we love him, and he would make a better mayor, but he won't win, and therefore the vote actually feels like it's important not to make a symbolic vote for the Portland mayor.
Yeah, I hate to say it.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Okay. Here we go. Our views often don't quite line up, but I really appreciate the contributions you both provide to the discourse. Keep up the great work. I appreciate you both. Thank you. You mentioned that you used to smoke copious amounts of marijuana that caused you to develop an allergy. What was the allergy you developed, and if you were able to get rid of it by quitting?
Haven't gotten rid of it. The allergy is just a reaction in my lungs, and interestingly, the reaction in my lungs happens even if I eat it. So
yeah, that's true, isn't it?
Yeah. There's something about, my immune system took it to be a hostile force, learned to fight it. And now if it shows up by any means, even through the gut, my lungs react and they fill with goo.
Yeah.
So, it's fine. I had more than my share.
That's right. That's right. Okay.
I don't need it, and I don't miss it, frankly.
Yeah. Okay. We're actually going to get through the questions that are here now, even though, God, it's late. But we're going to get through the rest of these this hour. Check out Kirk Sorensen and Gordon McDowell's and others' efforts to advance thorium within the nuclear industry. It looks to be safer and more abundant, but a barrier seems to be an entrenched uranium fuel industry.
Yep.
No doubt. So you know something about this. I know.
I sure do. I sure do. And I remain to be convinced that thorium is safe enough. But yes, if you were going to be serious about fission power, this would be one of the mechanisms you would want to be looking very carefully at. It is clearly safer and better. Yeah. And, of course, the uranium fission industry is not interested.
Right. One, do you see a parallel between neurodiversity movement and the CRT movement in the sense that both regard the world as a construct founded on exploitation of diverse groups? Two, do you support shock-based treatment of autism? Wow, I've never heard of shock-based treatment of autism. I doubt it, but I would have to hear more. I don't think so. Have you heard about this?
No.
Okay.
But I mean, that second one's easy,
Yeah.
right? I don't know exactly how you run the experiments, but the answer is if it helps, and helps has to be defined as, in some integrative way, you're more capable, I don't know, happier, more fulfilled.
I just don't think we have a good enough model of autism. I mean,
I don't think we do.
If you're talking about people who are, deeply unable to function in the world, for whom something like that might help, then maybe. But there's so many high functioning autistic people for whom,
right? I mean, certainly this wouldn't be about requiring it of.
Yeah,
somebody. But okay, on the first one,
do you see a parallel between the neurodiversity movement and critical race theory movement? In the sense that both regard the world as a construct founded on exploitation of diverse groups. Yeah, that's not how I see the neurodiversity movement at all.
The problem with this one, I would say not at all. Yeah. On the other hand, I think we've been down this road with the term anti-racist, where, as viewers of the podcast will remember, first time I heard the term, it was applied to me, and I thought that's great. I felt honored to be included in the category anti-racist. And I found out its narrow definition, and it's like, no, I don't want to touch that with a barge pole. Yeah. But so the point here is, neurodiversity, as I think people in our circle who talk about it mean, is just frankly, there's a lot of value that has been brought to the world by people who have things that would be considered deficits by many, including
high-functioning autism.
High-functioning autism, dyslexics, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so,
in fact, I did a Big Think video about this years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to the extent that neurodiversity is simply the recognition that even stuff where we're really talking about some kind of damage that results in you having a different view of the world can be very positive. And, the term I use for myself and many students was misfit, because misfit does not place judgment on whether it's you or the system that's a bad match, or it could be both. But, so there's a very intuitive reason to defend neurodiversity and not look to stamp it out. On the other hand, CRT is obviously an insane bastardization of a real recognition that there is some historical biases built into the way we think about race. So has neurodiversity become some sort of a toxic claim, or is it headed that direction, and then we should be wary of it? If so, we're not aware of it yet. So I don't see the parallel, but it could emerge.
Can we push back against this memory hole in some way, i.e. setting up a repository and decentralized server with censored, deleted content? I feel like there are some movements like that happening.
In fact, one is called the memory hole. I think there's a site called the memory hole.
Okay.
But yes, we have to push back. And also I would say that to the extent that something that does not have your interests at heart doesn't want you discussing something, you have an above average or above normal obligation to think carefully about it, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever it is that they don't want us talking about, we should be talking about. So if you're not talking about the implications of Hunter Biden's peddling influence in the form of his VP father, you should be thinking about it. Whether you're voting for Biden or not, you should be thinking about the implications that a Biden win is an influence peddler taking office. And you should also be thinking about the fact that some of us were telling you that from the beginning.
Yep. So next question from the author of this cyclical evolution hypothesis. He, I think, clarifies the cyclical evolutionary hypothesis presents a self-driven, population-wide, multi-generational, oscillating hormone cycle. So it's an intrinsic system.
Okay. It does sound like integral theory in some ways.
Yeah,
so,
it does.
The idea that there might be some cyclical pattern might well be. I still I still want to understand it can't be hormone driven.
Yeah.
Right. It's got to be hormones have to be driven by something else.
Exactly.
But
hi, there is a risk. Is there a risk that the increase of environmentalism in the West is going to create a new form of colonialism wherein rich nations intervene in other countries with the idea to protect Gaia's resources? It's already happening. Hi, yes. We've been on way too long, apparently. Yeah, it absolutely is already happening. You know, the U.S. got to basically cut down a lot of our forests and is now making a point of telling other people not to. And I'm thinking about, God, what is it? Institute de Biodiversidad in Costa Rica, INBIO, which I think actually is pretty honorable, and I hope still exists. But back when we were in graduate school, we spent a couple of field seasons in Costa Rica, and we're given a tour by our professor of INBIO, which was training, which was run by Costa Rican scientists, if I remember correctly. So just jump in if I get something wrong. And they were training poor Costa Ricans, poor ticos, as what they were calling parataxonomists, to basically collect an ID, but they were working with big pharma, right? So they were, I think, funded in part by, I don't remember who it was, Pfizer or Merck or something, probably Merck, and Merck wasn't able to just come in like they had been before the formulation of INBIO and find lots of organisms and take them back to the US or Germany or wherever and create new compounds and do the R&D and make billions on some drug. They now had to actually involve Costa Rica and its resources in the process somewhat, but it was more honorable than it had been, but it still had the risk of being predatory, I think.
Okay, but you've got a corrupt version of something. Mm-hmm. At some level, A, we did cut down our forests. B, we cut them down long before these dynamics were understood.
Yep.
We might have done it anyway, but it's in some sense not a fair comparison. But then C, we're also talking about the world's source of a large fraction of its biodiversity housed in these other forests. In other words, our northern temperate forests aren't all that diverse. Mm-hmm. The Amazon, for example, is fantastically diverse, and extinction is permanent. So
losing 100 acres of Amazonian forest, you can't replace that by supporting or growing 100 acres of boreal forest in Canada. It's not the same. It doesn't do anything like the same job.
So I think the thing that needs to be said is we have not yet worked out the governance structure that properly reflects that the arbitrary distribution of important biota is not the fact that these things fall within national borders does not allow Bolsonaro to destroy the Earth's only Amazon,
right?
Because he's a fruitcake and doesn't understand biodiversity, nor would he care about it, right? It's nobody's right to destroy it.
Right.
Does that mean every branch on every tree needs to be preserved? No, but we have to work out the structure in which those things that belong to humanity are protected in perpetuity, and we're a long way from it. But we do have to. This is one of the things I think the right gets quite wrong. Is we only have one Earth, and we are degrading it, and that's not our right. And so we have to stop. And how we get there without placing some people at advantage and other at disadvantage is a topic that needs to be explored.
Absolutely. Two more. They're just comments. Incompetent boob 2020. Love it. Yep. That's what we're doing.
Incompetent boob 2020. Biden and incompetent boob 2020.
I'm not settling for Biden. I'm not voting for either of those.
I'm not voting for Biden either.
Decrepit clowns.
I'm just pointing out that it belongs. The settle for Biden is an excellent slogan given Biden.
Yes.
And incompetent boob 2020 is an excellent slogan given Wheeler.
Yeah. Somehow I can get behind the incompetent boob, but neither decrepit clown.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we need to start a PLM, Puppy Lives Matter fund? The cats seem to get all the love here. Thanks for sharing your time and knowledge with us all.
Yeah, this is weird because the dog is a better person.
She's just aspires to be a better person. And
She gives a damn about being a good person, and
Yeah.
the cats manifestly don't. So
Right.
anyway, yeah, it's interesting that the cats seem to get more than their share of the milk.
yes, well, off camera, Madison here gets plenty of love, don't you?
Yes, she does.
Yeah. All right. She will be relieved to find that we are at the end of yet another, more than an hour by a lot. Tomorrow, again, we will be doing our private Q&A, which you can find you will be able to find a link to this evening on my Patreon. Tomorrow from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific. Next weekend will be the first of your monthly conversations through your Patreon. You can find access to the Discord server at either of them. And we will be back next Saturday on Halloween, if not sooner.
Halloween as if you weren't scared enough already. All right. We'll see you then.